Welcome to Wellness with John, resources to help you thrive. I'm John Peters, and this is part 3 of Eastern Psychology in Western Therapy. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about the holistic paradigm and some ways to think about that in terms of where it came from and how we apply it in our lives. Okay, so in this episode, I want to talk about the holistic paradigm. And it's something that you probably have heard of, holism or holistic health, holistic wellness practices. And I think sometimes people have a kind of superficial understanding of that and just think, well, I'm pursuing a holistic wellness plan if I get some element of non-conventional Western medicine. So if I go get massage or chiropractic treatment, or I get acupuncture, acupressure, things like that, I've done something outside the box, therefore I'm pursuing holism. And that's kind of a thin understanding of what holism is. And so that's why I'm making this video, because I want to talk about kind of the kernel of Eastern psychology, where it comes from, how it got into Western medicine and wellness in the first place. And your understanding of this through what I'm sharing in this video might actually broaden the way that you look at your own wellness plan and yourself and the types of things that you focus on and want to change in your life. So I've mentioned in other videos that in Western medicine, Western psychology, holism kind of got to us through the influence of Carl Jung. Jung was a student of Sigmund Freud. Jung had very different approaches to psychology, but Jung thought that we needed to go through a process of individuation to become a whole self. And Jung was a proponent of holism because Jung thought that one ought to survey very broadly cross-cultural understandings of deep psychology as evidenced in cultural rituals and writings and teachings and religions. And he looked for archetypes, these typical patterns that he thought showed up if you look really, really deeply into those texts. But Jung was encountering Eastern psychology because Jung was surveying cross-cultural information so broadly. And one important element in Eastern psychology that is manifested in Buddhism, especially in Buddhist teachings and Buddhist culture, is this idea of emptiness. And sometimes people from the West look at that word emptiness and think, okay, that means that Buddhists are somehow nihilists. But emptiness in the context of Buddhist philosophy and psychology is not nihilism, okay? And so here's a good way to understand emptiness in Buddhist psychology. Let's say that I am sitting at a fast food restaurant and I'm having lunch and I'm going to eat a cheeseburger. And so if I apply the concept of emptiness in understanding the cheeseburger, I'm going to do something very different than what we do in a superficial understanding of the cheeseburger, which is where I would just look at my plate and I would say, there's a cheeseburger sitting there. And if you said, hand me that cheeseburger, or if I said, I'm eating a cheeseburger, we all know without a lot of deep contemplation what we're talking about, right? A cheeseburger. It's got a bun, it's got a burger, it's got cheese, okay? But if we apply the concept of emptiness and we look deeply into and through the cheeseburger, then what I'm going to look at is, first I see the bun and I say, okay, the bun didn't just magically appear on my burger. There was a worker who prepared my sandwich. And so if I look at the cheeseburger, I am going to see the worker, because I can't be sitting there eating my cheeseburger unless I made it myself. If I ordered it at the restaurant, there must be workers involved in putting that sandwich together, okay? And so if I look through the sandwich into the worker, I see that worker's life, right? Because it's an actual person. It's not just a magical being that doesn't exist in the real world. That worker has a life. They have relationships with other people. They have commitments. They have worries, risks, liabilities. They drove a car to get to work that day. And if I look through the worker, I see the car. I see the money they owe on the car. I see the worries they have about paying those bills. I also see that there was gas that got expended in driving the car to work. And if there's gas, where did the gas come from? The gas didn't magically appear in the car. It came from the gas station. And how to get to the gas station? Well, it got there through these trucks. The trucks burned gas and oil to get the gas to the gas station. And still, that's not the first cause of gas getting into that car of the worker who made my sandwich. And so the gas was, the oil was extracted from the earth somewhere. And so if I look into my burger, I end up getting out to a vast array of causes that support the culmination of this sandwich sitting on my plate, right? If I look at the meat in, like I'm eating a beef burger, let's say, there was an actual cow or cows involved in producing that meat. Those cows lived somewhere. They farted methane, contributing to greenhouse gases, right? So if I look into my burger, I'm going to see greenhouse gases there somewhere. The cows ate food, and so that food was grown, let's say hay somewhere, wheat, whatever the fed, grains, and there was a lot of water that was used to, in the agricultural production of the food to feed the cows that ended up making the burger that's sitting on my sandwich, right? The cheese also came from milk. Milk comes from cows. Those cows are actual cows, not just magical cows producing magical cheese that just appears on my burger. And so if we look into the burger, the sandwich sitting on my plate, we end up finding that it is full of other things. It's full of the clouds that provided rain that rained on the fields so the grains could be grown to feed the cows. We find that it gets to the oil fields. We find that roads were involved because the burger wasn't produced at the restaurant in terms of all the sources. Those things traveled many miles to get to the place where it could be produced into the burger. So what emptiness says is that if we look deeply into anything, it could be anything. It could be my mouse for my computer. It could be my sandwich for lunch. It could be this camera I'm looking at right now. If we look deeply into any object with insight and understanding, what we find is that the object itself is so full of everything else because it's connected to everything else that it's primarily, not 100%, but it's primarily empty of the suchness that we assign to it when we have a superficial understanding of it. So when I say to you, hand me that cheeseburger, again, we understand what we're talking about. We both know what the cheeseburger is and we know what handing it over is. But we think that the cheeseburger is full of cheeseburgerness. And in fact, the cheeseburger is almost totally empty of cheeseburgerness because it is so full of all of the non-cheeseburger elements in the universe. Okay? And that's what emptiness means. It doesn't mean that it's absolutely empty. It doesn't mean nihilism. It means that the suchness of any point of focus, like a cheeseburger, like a camera, like a mouse for the computer, the suchness that we assign to it in order to handily relate to it the way we tend to relate to things is mostly empty of that suchness. My cheeseburger is mostly empty of cheeseburgerness, okay? And it's mostly full of the rest of the universe. And this is true also of us as people. If we look at ourselves with insight and understanding, what the mode of emptiness type analysis causes is a deeper understanding of the parts of the self and also how we relate to others. And it actually then also starts to transform our understanding of ego, because we tend to think of ourself as a very distinct thing with suchness. I am John, I'm full of Johnness. But in fact, if I examine what is John, I find that I am also intrinsically connected to the rest of the universe. And so that it is superficial for me to say that my understanding of myself is sufficient and that John is full of Johnness, okay? In this local sense, yes. And if I handily want to just say, who am I? I'm John, okay, sure. But if I look deeply into myself, I start to see interrelated parts, both within myself, and that boundary between myself and everything else also becomes a false distinction, so that even not just the camera and not just my cheeseburger, but me, John, I am mostly empty of Johnness, really, and I'm mostly full of everything else in the universe. Okay. And so uh, that's why holism borrows on that mode of analysis for looking at the self. And that's why it ends up being comprehensive, which is why it does take us out of the box of conventional Western medicine, because conventional medicine wants to rely on the more simplistic understanding of the self and the parts without looking deeply and without looking at the interconnectedness that we get through the application of the analysis that comes from considering what emptiness is. Okay. And so, again, that's why it's insufficient to just say, well, I get acupuncture as part of my wellness plan, therefore I'm following a holistic paradigm. In order to apply the holistic paradigm to yourself, you need to look at yourself broadly and deeply, okay? And you need to look at how your parts are interconnected. So if let's say that I have a headache. If I have a headache and I think about it simplistically, it's just a symptom. It's this one thing. It's a headache. And I don't consider it in the context of my day, my week, my life. And I don't think about what caused the headache and what it's related to and how it affects me and how it affects my performance, both like on my job and interpersonally with others. And so I just think, well, it's a headache. I'll take a Tylenol. I just want to get rid of the symptom. Okay. That's the conventional approach to symptoms in Western medicine. And that's what we do in Western psychology too. I feel miserable. My mood is bad. Just make me get out of this bad mood. Okay. But if we look deeply into the thing, the bad mood, the headache, and we say, okay, so what's connected to that? Well, let's say, okay, my pattern of headaches or my pattern of nightmares or my pattern of being irritable seems to be pretty related to this stressful situation that I'm dealing with in my life. Okay, so I need to get to that too. I need to say, okay, so what are the causes? What supports that situation? What are the barriers to me dealing with it in a fluid and effective way? And how might I be well informed, have good insights about the parts that are connected to the one thing that happens to be my point of focus that motivates me to try to pursue some change, the headache, for example. So holism is about considering the broad different domains of our life experience and our self and our functioning. Okay. So for example, thinking about ourself as a physical creature, as an emotional creature, as a creature with mentation and mental states, as a social creature, as a person who has depth and wants meaning and broad understanding of my place in life, right? As a person who has values and who wants to act in accordance with my values and toward my goals that I find important in my life, right? So if we think about ourselves along those comprehensively broad domains, then we are taking a more holistic approach to what am I up to? What am I experiencing? What do I want to be up to? What do I want to change? Because if we examine ourselves broadly, and by the way, I made a video for a practical check-in to look at yourself through the holistic paradigm called the Pies Check-in, and I'll put a link up here if you want to check that video out later. But we check in with ourselves broadly and deeply, and if we do that, then what we get to are sometimes things that we would have overlooked if we took a more superficial approach to the symptom or ourself. So if I take too superficial approach to I'm having a headache, I may not get to why I'm having a headache, and if I don't get to that, I might not be able to reduce the frequency and severity of my headaches. Okay, so holism is about intentionally, comprehensively, broad and deep looking at the self and our life in order to be able to have more wellness, have more depth, and more optimal well-being, and to thrive, right? So I thought I would share this as part 3 of thinking about ways that Eastern psychology and Eastern philosophy have influenced Western medicine and Western psychology. And if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below. And if you like the channel, feel very free to subscribe. And if you know somebody who might like one of my videos on the channel, feel free to share it with them or post it on your social media. And thanks for joining me today. And one last thing I want to tell you about is, and I'll put a link for this down in the description, is I have a free wellness book, free ebook to lower your stress and anxiety that comes out of the Eastern paradigm, and it applies concepts in acceptance and commitment therapy. It has easy to learn, easy to practice exercises that immediately are going to help you feel less stressed and less anxious. So click the link in the description below to get your copy of that free ebook, and I will see you in an upcoming video.